Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. Red Bull have reiterated their belief that Mercedes are the more fearsome outfit compared to Ferrari for next season, and do believe for two key reasons that Mercedes will be their key title challenger for the 2023 season rather than the Scuderia. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, plenty to bring you guys today. Firstly, an update from McLaren on the launch of their car. The 13th of February is the date they do this tweet. Right here, if you zoom in, you'll find in the bottom right hand corner a kind of post-it note that says launch deadline 13th of February. They join 4 other teams that now have confirmed their launch dates. Alfa Tauri on the 11th, Aston Martin and McLaren on the 13th. Valentine's Day has Ferrari with their new car, probably going to be rather good looking. And then the Alpine on the 16th, 5 teams still yet to be confirmed. One team that's not on the grid now, might be in the future, is Andretti. Cadillac, of course, we talked about yesterday, and they've confirmed their very serious intent to make this happen. The FIA is down. The response from the Formula 1 teams and also Formula 1 itself was rather more muted. So, of course, there is maybe an element of gatekeeping going on, but nonetheless, General Motors will be difficult to turn down, and especially because they're taking it seriously. Apparently, they've already hired a technical director. The other question that we have to answer around Andretti Cadillac is what driver pairing would they field if indeed they did, actually enter the sport? Now, it's obviously clear they'd want to hire at least one American driver. They actually got asked this question and said, yes, indeed, we definitely plan to have at least one American driver. And, he goes on to say, Michael Andretti here, I think you know who is leading the pack. That, of course, being Colton Herta, was linked at some points this season to multiple different teams. He was linked early on to McLaren in place of Riccardo. Then that didn't happen. He was then linked, I think, to the Alfa Tauri seat, right? And Red Bull wanted to make that work. Then they couldn't really do it. Gasly, of course, left Alfa Tauri, went to Alpine. They've brought in Nick de Vries instead. They wanted Herta, couldn't get him though. Of course, current IndyCar driver has been rather successful over there, shown a lot of promise. IndyCar is a very competitive field. There's a lot of veteran and phenomenal drivers in IndyCar. He's done relatively well so far in his career as a young American driver, obviously creating a lot of interest around him, but they couldn't get the super license to happen because to compete in Formula 1, you've got to get a super license, and IndyCar is very lowly, for competing in IndyCar, you get very few points towards your super license compared to the feeder Formula Series, despite the fact that IndyCar is arguably way more competitive. So for various reasons, Herta couldn't get it to work, but, if indeed there is going to be a seat available for Herta in the future for an American team, and they would certainly get him if they could, I'm sure they can find a way to make that happen going forward, even if that means Herta switches to another series or something like that. Of course, another possibility is none other than Daniel Ricciardo. We know that he's going to be the reserve or the third driver for Red Bull this season, but going forward, if Andretti Cadillac were to get approved for either next year in 24 or it's going to be 2025 or maybe never happens, who knows, but nonetheless, Daniel Ricciardo in that seat would be a very interesting option, and he likes America a fair bit as well. So just a few things to mention there, and you guys can feast on that in the comments below. The other side of this, yesterday we talked about the fact that Renault are apparently the leaders to be their engine manufacturer here, as apparently though Andretti have actually signed a deal already, so goes to show how serious they are with an engine supplier if they were to get approved. There's been some new rumours that's actually going to be Honda, because Cadillac and Honda already have a long-term relationship, and there's a large possibility that's what happens here as well, with Honda, no longer with Red Bull. Maybe they go to Cadillac. Still crazy to think about, but yeah, those are the updates on the Cadillac side. Let's talk Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari. From what we know right now, this is Mercedes upgrades for next year, sticking to their zero side pod concept. They're changing up the entirety of the rear suspension, largely for, let's just say, weight distribution and balance, also potentially for airflow reasons. They reckon they're going to fix the porpoising and will be down near the minimum weight that, of course, they're looking for, which all the teams are focusing on getting down to at this point, Red Bull and Ferrari included. Now, Mercedes have discussed their confidence going into the new season, as George Russell has even said recently, looking at the way they closed the gap at the start of last year to the end of this season was obviously rather impressive. In fairness, Abu Dhabi, they were still about half a second off the pace, but of course that was a massively bad day for Mercedes, and that was a track that suited them very badly based on their kind of, what do they call it, like the wall of death or something, the table of death or something that they have at Mercedes to determine whether their car's going to be good or bad on a particular weekend. It said it was going to be an awful weekend. It pretty much was a bad weekend, and they were maybe half a second on the pace, but at the start of the season they were on their bad days like a second off the pace. So they made significant gains such that around Brazil, higher downforce circuit, not massively high downforce, but still relatively high downforce, they were the fastest car by a margin and had a 1-2 with relative ease, all things considered. Hamilton fought back through the field, of course, to get second, with George Russell after winning both the sprints and the Grand Prix that weekend. So they made massive progress over the course of the season. If you look at maybe Aston Martin were similar in terms of the amount of development that they made over the course of it, but Mercedes made great progress, couldn't fix all of their issues, of course, inherent to their car design, but they are fully confident they can, of course, take a step with the W14, and even Hamilton goes on to say, I like to think we're going to be the ones that are competing with Red Bull again and being able to beat them again. I do believe that for sure, and also went on to say that he has great hope after the strong end to the season that indeed that's what's going to happen. So we'll see about that one. The other part of it, though, is who do Red Bull, who are they concerned about? They've got to be concerned to a certain extent about the budget cap breach they did, such that they've got a penalty in terms of their testing time. That won't affect them immediately. That's going to be more of a 12-18 months down the line effect that might have on their car developments. Even towards the end of the season, we might see some effect of that. So Red Bull would be expected to start out the stronger. If they don't, and either Mercedes or Ferrari have the stronger car at the start of the season, that is a good sign for the competitiveness of the season. But Helmut Marko has once again reiterated it, and we saw this statement a few days ago, but he's gone into more detail now about why they are more scared of Mercedes than they are of Ferrari. Now, in fairness, this makes sense. Mercedes did not long ago, right, win 8 consecutive Constructors' World Championships. It's not exactly a massive surprise that they are the more fearsome outfit, but, it's not like they've forgotten how to build a car and how to win championships. They just didn't have the car last year. Now, Ferrari have probably a great car again this year, based on what we're hearing. They've got a phenomenal engine as well, if they can actually make it work on a consistent basis, and that is one of the key reasons why Helmut Marko is more concerned about Mercedes. He goes on to say this: I would say that we should fear Mercedes more. Quite interesting he uses the word fear here, rather than, be concerned about. Straight up, fearing Mercedes and the way they're going to come back, because, I mean, look, I think it makes sense. If you've been on the F1 grid for some time and you've lived through the period of that Mercedes dominance, they were a fearsome team. They still are a fearsome team in some respects when they've got the car underneath them. And, as he goes on to say with specifics here, mainly because they have an advantage over Ferrari, both in terms of strategy and reliability. Now, Mercedes' strategy has been getting a fair bit of criticism, I think, this season, and understandably so in parts. I don't think their strategy has ever been phenomenal, but they've usually had the car and the drivers to get away with it. Lately, their strategy has been exposed a bit more. It's certainly weaker than Red Bull's, but it's certainly better than Ferrari's. And the reliability is another factor. The fact that Mercedes were even in the fight with Ferrari for P2 in the championship this season was quite remarkable to think about. The fact that Ferrari only won, 4 races the whole season, 3 for Leclerc, 1 for Sainz at Silverstone. Mercedes got 1 in the end, of course, in Sao Paulo. Goes to show that despite having a car that was probably on average on at least their slower days, at least half a second off the pace of the Ferrari over the course of the year, they were still able to be very close with them in terms of the championship, and almost could have beaten them in Abu Dhabi if things went differently and maybe Ferrari had another couple of reliability errors, let's say. Then Mercedes would have been there. So they've got the reliability, and also the fact that their engine was taking such a beating. I believe their head of their powertrain department said in a recent interview or recent kind of video on YouTube that the bouncing and the porpoising was not only beating up Hamilton's spine, but it was beating up the engine. Parts were getting worn, parts were kind of breaking apart because of the bouncing, and maybe arguably because of that they had to turn down their engines to a certain extent, and they were still incredibly reliable even given those issues. So with all that taken into account, Mercedes should be a very competitive team next year if they can put the car together. And I think the other factor that he doesn't specifically mention here but is a valid one is just the competitiveness of both Hamilton and Russell. Like, Leclerc is great, Sainz is, I think, great in a race, and Leclerc's better in qualifying, but comparing that duo to Hamilton-Russell, it's not quite a fair comparison. I mean, Hamilton and Russell were, at least in terms of qualifying and stuff, just so on a level pegging. Like, you always knew what the car was capable of because they'd put it within like 100 of each other over the course of a lap. So, I think that's another reason for Red Bull to be more fearful of Mercedes than the other way around. And also they kind of confirm, or at least from Marko's perspective, that the dominance they enjoyed in 2022 isn't necessarily going to be the same as what Mercedes had in 2014 at the start of the hybrid era, because at that time Mercedes had an engine that was so good compared to the rest of the field that they had a massive advantage that they carried through many years. Now, Mercedes obviously played a blinder politically over those years. Yes, they took their engine advantage quite far, but then when when everything changed around and there were new regulations, they adapted to those well. So it wasn't, but they did carry that advantage from 2014 through quite some way. Red Bull didn't have the same level of advantage from 2022. Yes, they've had the kind of head start on the new regulations, but there is good reason to believe that it's not similar in cause to the 2014 situation, and Red Bull should be more competitive, or other teams should be more competitive with Red Bull going forwards. But whether anyone can beat them and Max Verstappen is going to come down to whether Ferrari have a phenomenal car that can deal with their reliability potentially and certainly strategic problems that might still exist, or Fred Vasseur does a great job and fixes those very swiftly, but it's likely going to be a transitionary period there. Don't expect their reliability and strategic woes to go away immediately. So Mercedes, I think, understandably, are probably the more fearsome outfit for Red Bull, but still they should be favourites going forward. I mean, Verstappen's probably at least half, 50% chance that Verstappen goes ahead and wins his third straight title, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.